Senator Feingold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The hearing is focused on the question of resources, and that is very important because the American people are being asked to shoulder a tremendous burden in Iraq, and I do think we need more clarity on costs, and we need to be responsible about making this a part of the regular budget, not keeping it off the books as if it were some kind of surprise. In fact, that was my central emphasis in the Budget Committee and in the budget resolution, trying to kick the ball for the first time and say, could we at least be honest with the American people that this is going to cost something? And I think that's terribly important and the purpose for the hearing. But, Mr. Chairman, as I listen to Senator Chafee, I'm just astonished at our agreement. I started using this phrase, shifting justifications, a year ago in response to my inability to see what was the real purpose of the invasion of Iraq. And Senator Chafee is right. What he said about Liberia, and there's even more to it. There's a heck of a lot better evidence of possible al-Qaeda connections with regard to their financing of their operations in Liberia than there ever has been with regard to Iraq. And I can't vouch for that absolute validity of that. But if you're focused on the war against terrorism, you'd certainly be focused on Liberia at least as much as Iraq. And so I want to be sure that I understand your assertions here today. You said in your statement, in fact, the battle to secure the peace in Iraq is now the central battle in the global war on terror. Not stabilizing Afghanistan, where we know that al-Qaeda still operates, might understand that the way to defeat global terrorists who use international networks is to have the United States administration act on what you have described in your own words, Secretary Wolfowitz, as, quote, murky intelligence, when this action alienates important allies in fighting terror in places that do not appear to have meaningful links to al-Qaeda. That seems to be what you're saying. I mean, it sounds as if we've basically walked through the looking glass here. While our brave troops were marching into Baghdad on that very day, some of those responsible for the attack on the USS Cole, which you cited as a cost of our Iraq policy, were escaping from a prison in Yemen. People with known al-Qaeda connections, people who have been subsequently, after the escape, indicted. I would ask you, Secretary Wolfowitz, are you sure we have our eye on the ball?
I'm absolutely sure we have our eye on the ball, and the ball is a global one. As I said in quoting General Abizaid at some length, you can't view this through a soda straw. You can't focus exclusively on Iraq. You can't focus exclusively on Afghanistan, and you can't focus exclusively on those two things. Although, from a military point of view, those are our two principal tasks, as the President said over and over again. Fighting this war is going to require all the instruments of national power. We are applying them across the board. We've made some very big gains in the war on terrorism globally over the last few months, including rounding up some of the most serious terrorists, one of whom was the mastermind of September 11th, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Does it mean it's a uniform gain? No. You're right that a couple of people got away in that prison escape in Yemen. We're trying to find out why. General Abizaid has just been in the Horn of Africa, where we're looking very, very closely at what's going on there and what can be done to stop it. And it's not just a military effort, but also, let's be clear, it's going to be a long struggle. We've made gains, but we are still vulnerable. We're vulnerable as a country to some very severe attacks. But there is no question in my mind that we will be much more secure when we win this battle in Iraq, and we will win it. And then we will have a valuable ally in the Arab world instead of a country that is a source of instability and sanctuary and resources and other things for terrorists. And I think the terrorists understand that. That's why so many of them have come to Iraq to fight. It's interesting, when we met with the Marines who had that eastern flank advance up to Baghdad, I asked General Mattis what the opposition was like. He said the main people who fought us were the Fedayeen Saddam and the foreign terrorists. And I said, how do you know they were foreigners? He said, well, we found a lot of passports on the corpses that were from foreign countries, and some of them even said in the entry permit the purpose of their visit to Iraq was to perform jihad and to kill Americans. It's much better, as General Abizaid has said, to be killing those people in Iraq than to have them come here and kill Americans.
Mr. Chairman, I would certainly suggest, and in fact I think your comments, Mr. Secretary, suggest that these people came to Iraq in large part because of our actions vis-a-vis Iraq. And at the same time, We are not doing so well, in my view, with regard to the war against terrorism in places such as East Africa and Afghanistan, and even in situations such as West Africa. We can only do so much. I mean, this hearing is about resources, financial resources and others. We also can only accomplish a few things well at one time. And in my view, the overemphasis on Iraq has caused a serious erosion in our ability to go after the actual operatives who are trying to kill ourselves and our children. Mr. Bolton,
I think that's simply wrong, Senator.
Did you want to respond to that?
Well, I disagree with that strongly. I think we have maintained pressure across the board, and not just military pressure, pressure through the intelligence agencies, pressure through law enforcement agencies. And I would also emphasize, as I think I said to the chairman, the war on terrorism is a two-front war. One front is killing and capturing terrorists. The other front requires something more positive, something that builds hope in the Muslim world and especially in the Arab world, that can be a counter to the evil appeal that bin Laden and his followers hold out. And success in Iraq is going to be important in that respect, and that is why the terrorists, along with the Baathists, are targeting our success. They want to bring back a terrible regime, and if I spent a lot of time talking about how terrible that regime was, it's because I did not come here, Senator, to talk about the justifications of the war. I came up here to talk about what is needed for reconstruction and rehabilitation. Frankly,
well, Mr. Chairman,
the Iraqis do not care.
I'm going to interrupt here, Mr. Secretary, and say I did not come here planning to discuss this whatsoever. This was a hearing about resources. Only when your testimony at length stated that Iraq is the central location on the war against terror, that it was impossible for me to ignore such an extreme interpretation of what's happening in the world. I think the American people are onto this idea and are aware that this administration has grossly exaggerated the connection between the war on terrorism and the Iraq situation. And I would strongly suggest we focus on the merits of trying to deal with the Iraq situation that we have at hand, instead of constantly trying to pretend that September 11th and Iraq are the same issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.